There are moments in history when a single life becomes a storm, sweeping across the world with a force no one can contain. Genghis Khan was such a storm, born in silence, shaped by hunger, and carried forward by a fire that refused to die. His story is not gentle, yet when whispered to quiet hours of night, it becomes something different, a tale of a boy wandering across frozen grasslands, searching for warmth in a world that gave him none. In the stillness of this evening, we look not into the violence of his path, but into the shadows that formed him, the longing that drove him, and the unforgivable legacy he left behind. Slowly, softly, we walk alongside him as the past drifts open like a dimly lit horizon. And if these words help you breathe a little easier, if the soft rhythm of history settles the edges of your night, then let this channel remain gently by your side. Whenever sleep feels distant, these stories can guide you closer, one quiet moment at a time. The story of Genghis Khan does not begin with an empire, nor with a warrior, nor even with name the world would one day whisper with awe and fear. It begins with child, small and thin, standing on the open steppes where the horizon is so wide it feels like the earth is breathing. His name was Temujin, and long before he learned to command thousands, he learned simply to survive. The nights of his early years were quiet, filled with the soft rustle of wind passing over grass that stretched on forever. Sometimes that wind carried the sounds of distant horses, or the creaking of wooden wheels from another tribe moving across the plains. But most nights were still. In that stillness, Temujin listened to the world as if it were an old friend whispering secrets. The sky above him was huge, a dark bowl dusted with stars that flickered like small fires. He often fell asleep watching them, wondering why some shone brighter than others, and if they could see the loneliness he sometimes felt. His father, Yasujii, was a respected leader, stern, proud, but not unkind. Temujin admired him deeply. Yet even as a boy, he sensed that love in the steppe came quietly, rarely spoken aloud, carried instead in gestures and shared meals in the simple touch of a hand on his shoulder. In those early days, he felt anchored by his father's presence, held steady by the certainty of family. But that certainty cracked sooner than anyone expected. One evening, after a long journey, Yasujii was poisoned by enemies and died before he could return home. Temujin, still a child, watched his mother's face fall into an expression he never forgot. She did not scream. She did not collapse. She simply lowered her head, and something inside her seemed to turn to stone. The wind outside continued its endless song, but inside the small tent, the world felt painfully silent. With Yasujii gone, the family's clan abandoned them. In the harsh rules of the steppe, strength meant survival, weakness meant exile. Suddenly, Temujin, his mother, and his siblings were left alone, stripped of protection, forced into a life where each day could end in hunger. He remembered how cold the world felt then. Nights grew sharper, the air biting through their thin shelter. Food became a question rather than a guarantee. Temujin learned to gather roots, to set traps for small animals, to work with his hands until they ached. His mother, Holun, taught them how to survive not with bitterness, but with quiet resilience. She would speak softly as they ate whatever little they had, telling them stories of endurance, and reminding them that strength often grows in silence. Temujin listened, every word a seed that settled deep within him. Still, the loneliness wrapped around him like a second skin. His older brother better held a different kind of strength, bolder, more confident, and increasingly at odds with Temujin. The tension between them simmered through the years of hardship. What began as small disagreements slowly grew into conflict, fueled by hunger and desperation. One day, the friction cracked into tragedy. In a moment both impulsive and irreversible, Temujin took Better's life. It became a wound he carried forever. Afterward, the wind felt heavier. His mother's silence weighed on him like winter snow. Temujin did not speak of what he had done, but the guilt settled in him, shaping him in ways he could not yet understand. He began to see how quickly a life could be taken, how fragile people truly were. And somewhere inside, a resolve formed. He would never be powerless again. But life did not ease for him. When Temujin was still young, he was captured by a rival tribe, bound by a wooden collar, treated like property. He spent his days beneath the open sky feeling smaller than ever. Nights passed slowly as he stared at the stars he once loved, wondering if he would die before becoming anything more than a forgotten boy on the steppe. Yet captivity strengthened him in an unexpected way. He watched, waited, learned, and one quiet night, under the cover of darkness, he escaped with the help of a single man, a stranger who chose mercy instead of cruelty. Temujin never forgot that kindness. It became a reminder that even in a world shaped by brutality, compassion still flickered through the cracks. When he returned to his family, something in him had changed. The pain, the hunger, the betrayal, the loss, none of it had crushed him. It had carved him. He was still young, but the boy who came back was sharper, steadier, and quieter than the one who had been taken. He began gathering allies, choosing people not for their bloodline, but for their loyalty, a revolutionary idea on the steppe. Each step he took was small, almost unnoticeable at first, but together they began forming the path that would lead him toward power. As the chapter approaches its end, we can feel the early shape of destiny forming around him, like storm clouds building at the edge of a long, dry horizon. The winds of his childhood, cold, merciless, unyielding, had forged the first hints of the man he would become. The world had tried to break him. Instead, it prepared him. And so, as the night deepens around his young life, Temujin stands quietly at the threshold of legend, unaware of the empire waiting in the shadows of his future. As Temujin stepped deeper into adolescence, the world around him seemed to shift in slow, subtle ways, like grass bending toward the direction of an unseen wind. He walked the steps with more deliberate stride now, his eyes carrying the quiet intensity of someone who had already lived too many lives in too few years. Yet beneath the new hardness in him, something gentle still lingered, a small ember of hope, glowing softly beneath the ashes of hardship. It was during this period of new beginnings that he felt the pull toward a girl named Borte, someone who would become not only a companion, but a steady warmth in his life. Their marriage had been arranged, yet their bond grew from something deeper than tradition. Borte carried a calm presence, the kind that eased the weight he had carried since childhood. When she spoke, her voice felt like a blanket placed over the coldest parts of him. Temujin often found himself listening more than talking, absorbing her words like someone finally receiving the comfort they had long been denied. For a brief moment in time, things felt almost peaceful. Their small circle of allies slowly grew. Men who had suffered the same cruel rules of the steppe gravitated toward Temujin, drawn by his fairness, his ability to see strength in loyalty rather than blood. This quiet revolution, selecting allies not because of clan ties but because of trust, was unlike anything the tribes had known before. Every night, as they sat around the fire, they shared stories that drifted upward into the dark sky. Temujin listened to them closely. He learned their fears, their dreams, their loyalties. He began to understand that power was not built through fear alone, but through the promise of belonging. Still, the world had not finished testing him. One night, under a moon that hung low and pale, their camp was raided by the Merkit tribe, one of Temujin's oldest enemies. In the chaos, Borte was seized and taken away. The memory of that night haunted him. He remembered the way her voice faded into the darkness, the sound carried off by the wind, leaving behind an emptiness that felt too familiar. The loss struck him deeper than any wound he had received in his rough childhood. It was a pain that reopened every scar he had tried to mend. Temujin did not collapse beneath the weight of it. He hardened, with a resolve sharp enough to cut through despair. He sought help from two allies who would shape his destiny: Jamukha, his childhood friend and blood brother, and Togrul, a powerful Khan who had once been close to Temujin's father. Their support was not guaranteed. Trust on the steppe was fragile, a thread easily snapped by ambition. But in this moment of shared purpose, they stood with him. Together, they rode across the plains, their horses pounding against the earth like the heartbeat of vengeance itself. The rescue of Borte was swift and fierce, but the emotional weight lingered long after. When she returned to him, shaken but alive, Temujin held her with quiet intensity, relief and guilt swirling through him like twin currents. He had lost so much in life: family, safety, childhood, but losing her had nearly broken him in a way nothing else had. Her return strengthened a vow within him, one carved from both love and determination. He would never again allow the world to take something precious from him. Their bond deepened, shaped by shared suffering and survival. Borte often sat close to him during the cold nights, resting her hand on his arm, grounding him with a presence that soothed the restless fire growing inside him. Temujin found comfort in her steadiness, but he also felt the pull of something larger, an instinct that whispered of future battles, alliances, betrayals, and an enormous shadow his destiny would one day cast. The turning point came soon after, when the delicate alliance with Jamuka began to crack. Their friendship had once felt unbreakable, forged during childhood games and solemn oaths. But as both men grew older, their paths began to diverge. Jamuka, noble-born and proud, believed he was the rightful heir to power. Temujin, born from hardship and shaped by suffering, saw leadership differently, not as a birthright, but as something earned through unity. Small disagreements became distant coldness. Coldness became suspicion. And suspicion, in the world of the steppe, always led toward conflict. Yet even as tensions rose, Temujin held on to belief that a new kind of future was possible, one where the endless cycle of tribal blood feuds could be broken. He imagined a nation built on shared purpose, not fracture. It was a dream that flickered like a small flame against the vast darkness of tradition. But dreams do not grow peacefully in a world ruled by survival. The steppes remained a place where bitterness could rise as suddenly as a storm. And Temujin sensed that something was shifting beneath the calm, like the silent gathering of clouds before a long night of thunder. The boy who had once stood alone in the cold was now surrounded by allies. Yet he felt the weight of expectation pressing heavily against his shoulders. Every choice he made carried consequences that reached far beyond his small encampment. His life was no longer simply his own. It was becoming the beginning of a force that would reshape the world. And so, at the close of this chapter's second part, he stands at a crossroads, caught between loyalty and destiny, between the memory of storms he survived and the new storms rising quietly on the horizon. The path before him stretches wide and uncertain, waiting for the footsteps that will soon echo across continents. The days following Borte's rescue passed with strange quietness, as though the steppe itself were catching its breath after the violence that had stirred its grasses. Temujin moved through the silence with contemplative heaviness, aware that life had shifted again in ways not yet visible. He had brought back the person most precious to him, yet something deeper inside him had changed, a realization that survival alone was no longer enough. The world had shown him its cruelty too many times. Now it seemed to whisper that he was meant to shape it rather than merely endure it. Each morning, he stepped outside their modest gur before anyone else was awake. The horizon spread before him like an untouched canvas of pale gold, the faint glow of dawn stretching across the endless plains. The wind carried the scent of dew and dust, the familiar essence of home. But Temujin felt something different riding on that breeze, an almost imperceptible shift, like the steady heartbeat of an approaching future. He spent many hours in solitude, not out of sorrow but out of reflection. The memory of Borte's abduction lingered with him like a shadow he could not quite shake. Though she returned unharmed, the terror of losing her carved a deep scar inside him, a reminder of how quickly the world could take what mattered most. Borte often watched him from a distance, sensing the weight he carried but honoring his silence. She knew that some wounds needed no words, only time. Their small group of followers continued to grow, men drawn by the unspoken strength Temujin carried. He did not command them through fear, nor bind them with promises of wealth. Instead, they saw in him a kind of quiet certainty, a belief in fairness that was rare in a world of shifting loyalties. When he walked among them, they stood a little straighter. When he spoke, they listened as though his words wove a path towards something long dreamed of but never named. Yet beneath this fragile unity, an undercurrent of tension was forming. Jamuka, once Temujin's closest companion, seemed increasingly distant. His smiles no longer reached his eyes, and his compliments held a subtle bitterness, like honey masking something sharp beneath. Temujin felt it, though he tried not to let the discomfort settle within him. Their childhood bond had been a cherished memory. Two boys sharing dreams under starlit skies, swearing brotherhood with the innocence of youth. But the steppe had a way of reshaping boys into men who no longer recognized each other. One evening, Temujin and Jamuka stood together overlooking a wide valley where their horses grazed, their silhouettes fading into the soft twilight. Jamuka spoke first, his voice steady but laced with something unspoken. "You have gained many allies," he said. "Men who follow you with a confidence I have rarely seen." Temujin nodded. "They seek a place to belong. A life without constant betrayal." Jamuka's jaw tightened. Belonging is earned through tradition, through noble birth, through heritage. Temujin let the silence stretch between them like a thin crack in ice. He did not argue, for he knew that Jamuka's pride was fragile, beautiful in its way, but easily bruised. Yet this moment marked the beginning of a quiet fracture. Their paths, once intertwined like braided leather, now began to pull apart in opposite directions. As the days lengthened into summer, a different kind of challenge arrived. Several smaller clans approached Temujin, asking for help in settling disputes, offering their loyalty in return. It was unusual, almost unheard of, for clans to seek guidance from a young man without noble status. But Temujin listened to them patiently, offering fair judgment, refusing bribes, and treating even the poorest herdsmen with respect that stunned those who had known only the cold hierarchy of tribal life. It was these small acts, unnoticed by most, that slowly began to reshape the world around him. Borte watched this transformation with a quiet pride. In the evenings, she would sit beside him by the fire, her presence steady and warm. Sometimes she spoke in gentle tones, reminding him to rest, to breathe, to allow parts of himself to remain soft despite the hard world that shaped him. Temujin valued these conversations more than any gift. They anchored him to the life he wished to protect. But even amidst this calm, the steppe was never still for long. One night, as the moon rose full and bright, Temujin gathered with his men to discuss troubling news. Rumors spoke of tribes forming alliances not for peace, but for power. A distant relative of Jamuka had begun to stir ambition within the old noble families, whispering that the time had come to restore the ancient order, an order in which men like Temujin had no place. The fire crackled softly as Temujin listened. His face remained calm, but a deep resolve settled within him. Borte, sitting quietly at his side, could feel the shift in him, the sharpening of purpose, the awakening of something vast and unstoppable. Later that night, long after the others had fallen asleep, Temujin walked alone beneath the vast canopy of stars. The air was cool, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves. He lifted his gaze to the sky, imagining it as a great map stretching beyond the horizon, filled with paths he had yet to walk. His destiny felt both overwhelming and strangely intimate, like a flame that warmed him even as it threatened to consume everything in its path. He closed his eyes and let the silence speak to him. He was no longer merely a survivor, no longer a boy standing in the cold, waiting for someone to return. He was becoming something more, a force shaped by hardship, guided by loyalty, and driven by a vision few could yet see. This was the quiet before the storm, the final breath before the world began to shift around him. And as dawn approached, Temujin understood that part 3 of his journey marked a point where destiny stopped whispering and began to call his name. The nights grew longer, and the wind across the steppe carried a different tone, a quiet promise, as if the earth itself was preparing for the coming storm. Temujin walked slowly among his campfires, feeling the rhythm of the plains beneath his feet. Every flicker of light, every whisper of the grass seemed to speak to him, reminding him of the path he had already traveled and the choices that still awaited him. Each step was deliberate, each breath a soft meditation, for he knew that even the smallest moment of weakness could ripple across the lives he now bore responsibility for. Borte remained close, her presence steady and comforting. She often watched him in silence, understanding without words the weight that rested upon him. Their bond had deepened through hardship, rescue, and the unspoken trust that had grown between them. She had seen the boy who once trembled under the harshness of the world become a man who carried the same world in his hands, carefully, patiently, without losing the ember of compassion that had survived every trial. The tension with Jamuka hung over the camp like a low, dark cloud, ever present, yet invisible until it moved. Scouts returned with fragmented tales of his maneuvers, rumors of betrayal, and shifting allegiances that reached every corner of the steppe. Temujin listened, absorbing every detail, not reacting in haste. He had learned through childhood and loss that patience was a weapon as sharp as any blade. The men around him sensed it. They felt the quiet certainty in the way he spoke, in the weight of his gaze, in the calm that followed even the most troubling news. At night, Temujin would stand on a small rise overlooking the camp, the firelight flickering below, the shadows of his men stretching long and wavering in the dark. He closed his eyes and let the cold air brush against his face, the scent of smoke and grass mixing into a familiar, almost sacred aroma. He thought of his father, of the lonely nights when survival depended on nothing but quiet observation and cunning. He thought of his mother, Holun, whose resilience had given him his first lessons in endurance. And he thought of Borte, whose unwavering trust gave him courage even when fear tugged at his chest. The memory of his childhood betrayals, of his brother Better's death, and the harshness of exile now seemed like threads weaving together into a single tapestry, preparing him for the man he was meant to become. He had survived the small cruelties of life, but now the world demanded more, a strength not only in body but in vision, in patience, in the subtle shaping of loyalty and power. In the deep hush of midnight, Temujin made his first silent plans. Not plans of reckless conquest, but of careful unity, alliances forged not only by blood but by loyalty, by shared purpose, by the promise that every man under his banner would matter. He imagined a future where the steppe would no longer be a place of endless feuds and fleeting victories, but a land where order and fairness could stand alongside courage and cunning. The men around him slept, their breaths slow and steady, unaware of the intensity in their leader's mind. He felt the weight of each life as though it were his own, each possibility stretching outward into the dark like an invisible map. The night was vast, but within it, Temujin discovered clarity. He understood that the coming confrontations with Jamuka and other rival Khans were inevitable, but the true challenge would be in shaping the steppe into a world that could endure beyond personal ambition. Before dawn, Temujin walked back toward the center of the camp. He passed men and horses alike, each one resting, each one unaware that history was quietly coalescing around them. He knelt beside a dying fire and ran his hands over the glowing embers, feeling the warmth rise into his chest, a small reminder that even amidst the darkness, life and power persisted. Borte approached, settling beside him without a word. She laid her hand over his, a silent reminder that even the weight of destiny could be tempered with tenderness. Temujin looked at her, and for a long moment, the chaos of the world, the betrayals, the looming conflicts, the ambitions of men, was held at bay by the simple, enduring connection between them. The first light of day finally broke over the horizon, spilling golden warmth across the plains. Temujin rose slowly, his shadow stretching long and firm behind him. He felt the quiet pulse of the world beneath his feet, steady and unyielding. The journey that had begun with boy abandoned, a family exiled, and a heart hardened by loss was now stepping into a larger rhythm. The rhythm of destiny calling him forward. The wind carried his name, softly at first, then with the insistence of history, waiting to be written. Temujin's eyes lifted to the vast horizon, to the lands that would one day feel the echo of his presence, and he felt the first true understanding of the power that lay ahead. He had survived, he had grown, and he had begun to shape the world in ways no child on the steppe could have imagined. And so, as the morning sun touched the endless grass and the camp stirred into life, Temujin's journey moved quietly forward, the boy who had once been abandoned now standing on the threshold of legend, unaware of the full breadth of the empire that would one day bear his name. The stage was set. The alliances, the betrayals, and the battles of the steppe were just beginning. And the story of Genghis Khan, tempered by hardship, courage, and quiet determination, was ready to unfold across the world. The winds of the steppe had shifted, carrying whispers of change that reached far beyond the fires of Temujin's camp. The boy who had once struggled to survive now moved with the quiet authority of a man who understood both the weight of loss and the promise of what could be built from it. The plains stretched endlessly, a canvas for ambition, a mirror for determination, and Temujin's vision began to take shape in the gentle folds of the land. In this chapter, the focus turns to the rise of Temujin as a leader, not merely of a small band of followers, but of a movement that began to challenge the old hierarchies of the steppe. He learned to blend patience with strategy, loyalty with foresight, and compassion with the quiet ruthlessness required to survive in a world ruled by strength. Battles were fought, not only with swords but with alliances carefully woven like threads of silk across the clans. Each decision he made carried weight far beyond the horizon, shaping the steppe in ways the people could not yet see. Jamukha remained a looming presence, a reminder of both the fragility of friendship and the harshness of ambition. The tension between them became a silent drumbeat beneath the songs of the campfires, a rhythm that Temujin felt in the pulse of every horse, every whispered counsel, every vow of loyalty. Through hardship, resilience, and growing wisdom, Temujin began to transform from the boy abandoned on the steppe into a Khan whose name would echo across generations. Yet the world was not yet fully bent to his vision, and the challenges ahead would test every lesson he had learned, every bond he had forged, and every ember of courage that remained in his heart. The steppe had never been still. Even in the quietest hours of the night, a subtle rhythm pulsed through the grass and the soil beneath Temujin's feet, a rhythm that spoke of distant storms, of shifting loyalties, of empires waiting to awaken. He had learned to listen to it, to feel its currents like an extension of his own breath. Each footfall, each whisper wind, carried meaning, and had grown adept at reading the messages the plains offered, messages that others would miss, too absorbed in tradition and fear to notice the subtle signs of change. The memory of Borte's abduction still lingered, a shadow softened only by the warmth of her hand in his, a reminder that what mattered most was worth guarding with every ounce of his being. That night of terror had left its mark, but it also left him strengthened, sharpened by the knowledge that the world would always test the ones it intended to mold. And so he moved forward, each decision weighed not by impulse but by vision, understanding that a leader's strength came not only from the sword, but from the loyalty he inspired, the fairness he embodied, the quiet certainty he carried in his gaze. The clans began to notice. Small gatherings of leaders came forward, seeking guidance, proposing alliances. Temujin received them all, speaking softly, listening more than he spoke, and in that silence, he began to shape trust. Men who had once considered loyalty a birthright began to understand that it could be earned, nurtured, and honored. He spoke of fairness, of unity, of a future where the endless cycle of vengeance would yield to a broader purpose. Some came reluctantly, wary of the unknown, yet left convinced that the boy who had survived exile and betrayal carried a vision worth following. Jamukha's shadow, however, was never far. Their paths had diverged, yet the steppes seemed to whisper reminders of the boyhood they had shared, the oaths they had sworn under the stars. Temujin felt a tension beneath every alliance, a pulse of potential conflict hidden behind every smile of agreement. The bonds of blood and friendship had frayed. Yet each man's choices echoed across the plains, shaping destinies with subtle inevitability. One evening, as a pale moon rose over the horizon, Temujin gathered his trusted advisors and allies around a modest fire. The night air was crisp, carrying with it the distant howl of wolves, the soft rustle of grass, the faint smell of smoke. He spoke with calm authority, yet every word was deliberate, weaving strategy into story, vision into counsel. "We do not seek conquest for its own sake," he said. "We seek a world where loyalty is honored, where strength is measured by courage and fairness, and where the steppe itself bends to the justice of those who understand it." The men listened, enraptured by the quiet intensity of his vision. There was no shouting, no grandiose display of force. The power of his words lay in their clarity, in the weight of a man who had endured suffering yet refused to be consumed by it. It was a soft, unshakable kind of strength that drew the weary, the frightened, and the ambitious alike. And as the night deepened, Temujin understood that the network he was forming, threads of loyalty and trust stretched across the clans, would become the foundation upon which empires could rise. Borte watched from a distance, her presence a grounding force, a quiet affirmation of all that he fought to protect. She had become more than companion. She was a witness to his growth, a keeper of his humanity, the gentle balance of the fire that burned in him. She sensed his thoughts before he spoke, and her eyes held the quiet reassurance that, even in the harshest storms, he was never truly alone. But the steppe is never entirely calm. Rumors of Jamukha's movements reached them. Small raids, whispers of discontent, alliances formed behind closed tents. Temujin received each piece of news with patience, analyzing every detail, measuring every reaction. He had learned that rashness could destroy even the most carefully built trust, that power wielded without foresight could unravel everything he sought to achieve. And so he waited, calculated, and prepared, understanding that the coming confrontations were not merely tests of strength, but a vision, strategy, and the quiet endurance of the human spirit. As the first hints of dawn touched the horizon, casting a gentle glow across the endless grass, Temujin mounted his horse and rode quietly along the edge of the camp. The world seemed vast, endless, and yet intimate in a way only those attuned to its rhythms could perceive. Every whisper of wind, every shadow of cloud, every distant cry of life carried meaning. He felt the pulse of the steppe beneath him, steady, alive, and full of possibility. In that early light, he realized that he had become more than a survivor, more than a boy shaped by hardship. He was a rising Khan, a force poised to reshape not only the lands he knew, but the very destiny of the people who would follow him. And as he gazed across the plains, he felt the quiet thrill of inevitability, the sense that the world was beginning to bend in response to his vision, and that the journey of the rising Khan was only just beginning. The steppe was restless, whispering secrets in the sway of grass and the low rumble of distant hooves. Temujin felt it deep in his chest, the subtle pulse of change that even the wind could not conceal. Scouts brought word of Jamukha's growing power, of alliances forming in the shadows, and the young Khan's calm resolve met the news not with panic, but with quiet calculation. He had learned that the true measure of strength lay not in the immediacy of battle, but in the patience to understand the currents before striking. By late afternoon, he gathered his closest companions around a fire that flickered softly in the fading light. The men sat in silence as he spoke, his voice a low, steady thread weaving through the gentle sigh of the wind. Jamukha believes that loyalty is inherited, that birthright is power. He does not yet see that true leadership is earned through trust, through fairness, through vision. We will show him that the steppe bends only to those who understand it. The words carried a weight beyond their sound, settling deep into the hearts of those who listened. Men who had once followed only for survival now followed for purpose, for belief in the quiet authority Temujin embodied. They felt in the way he considered each decision, in the softness with which he spoke to the weakest, and the calm certainty that even the harshest threat could not shake him. Night fell, and the horizon stretched endlessly, the stars sharp and cold against the dark velvet sky. Temujin rode along the ridge of a distant hill, surveying the lands that would soon see the first tremors of confrontation. His horse moved silently, each step deliberate, each breath in rhythm with the whispering wind. The camp below lay hushed, and for a moment, the world seemed suspended between what had been and what was about to be. Then came the first clash, not with swords, but with words carried on the wind. Scouts returned with reports of Jamukha's emissaries, arriving at the fringes of Temujin's growing network, offering threats disguised as warnings, promises masked as intimidation. Temujin listened, letting the messages settle before he responded. His silence was not uncertainty, but strategy. The steppe demanded patience, and he had learned to honor its lessons. By the third night, tension had ripened into its first tangible confrontation. Jamukha himself appeared on the horizon, mounted on a horse whose shadow stretched long in the pale moonlight. Around him rode nobles and warriors, banners fluttering with the insignia of old power, the scent of authority and ambition drifting faintly across the plains. Temujin watched from a distance, every sense alive, every instinct aware. He could see the pride in Jamukha's posture, the quiet arrogance of a man convinced of inherited supremacy, and he felt, deep within, the pulse of inevitability. This first encounter would shape not only their fates, but the future of the steppe itself. Temujin approached with calm deliberation, his horse's hooves stirring the earth softly, a quiet rhythm that mirrored the pulse of his own heartbeat. When the two men finally faced one another, silence spoke louder than any word. Jamukha's eyes, once filled with the warmth of brotherhood, now glimmered with the hard edge of rivalry. Temujin's gaze met his with a steady intensity, unflinching, unhurried, as though he alone understood the larger tapestry that stretched beyond this moment. "You have grown," Jamukha said, his voice carrying over quiet fields. "But the steppe remembers what is owed. Blood will not forget its place." Temujin's reply was soft, almost a whisper against the night. Yet every word struck like a bell in the still air. The steppe remembers more than blood. Jamukha, it remembers justice, loyalty, and the men who stand with honor. That is where true power lies, not in birthright, but in the strength of those who choose to follow you. A silence fell again, heavier this time, as if the plains themselves were listening, weighing the truth in the words. Neither man made the first move. Around them, the campfires of their allies glimmered like distant stars, witnesses to a quiet tension that would soon roar into battles far larger than either could yet imagine. As the night deepened, Temujin withdrew, his mind alive with strategies, alliances, and contingencies. The first confrontation had not yet erupted into bloodshed, but the lines were drawn. He understood now that this rivalry would not be brief. It would shape his every choice, test his resolve, and demand all the wisdom and courage he had gathered from years of hardship. Borte waited as he returned, her presence a gentle tether to the world he had not yet fully conquered. She did not speak, for words were unnecessary. Her steady gaze and quiet strength reminded him that even amidst uncertainty and the shadow of rival ambition, he had what he needed to endure, to plan, to rise. The boy who had once been abandoned, who had wandered the plains in fear and hunger, now prepared to step into the first true battle of his vision. The steppe stretched endlessly before him, alive with possibility, danger, and the faint, inexorable whisper of destiny calling him forward. And so the first challenge between Temujin and Jamukha settled into the long, quiet night, a tension alive in every rustled grass, every distant howl, every flicker of firelight, marking the beginning of a rivalry that would forever change the face of the steppe. The first light of dawn brushed softly across the steppe, gilding the grass with gentle gold, as if nature itself wished to temper the violence about to unfold. Temujin surveyed the horizon with calm, deliberate eyes. The scouts had returned with news. Jamukha's forces had gathered in strength, their banners snapping sharply in the wind, each one a declaration of ambition, pride, and ancient lineage. The moment of confrontation had arrived, yet Temujin felt no fear, only focus, only the quiet clarity of a mind honed by years of loss and survival. His own men moved like shadows among the tall grass, silent, disciplined, and attentive. Each rider, each horse, each warrior understood the rhythm of Temujin's command, a rhythm born of trust, patience, and respect. Unlike Jamukha, whose soldiers followed out of duty or obligation, Temujin's allies followed because they believed in the vision he embodied. That belief, fragile yet unbreakable, was a force stronger than steel, and he carried it in the measured sway of his own pulse. The first clash was not of swords, but of strategy. Temujin guided his forces with precision that seemed to flow naturally, like water carving a riverbed through the plains. Scouts circled silently, reporting movements, weaknesses, and openings. He adjusted his lines, shifted his archers, and positioned his cavalry with subtlety that spoke not of brute force, but of foresight. The steppe itself seemed to bend under his understanding. Every wind gust and uneven patch of grass mapped his mind, as if the land itself were an ally. Jamukha's pride was evident as he approached the field. His voice carried across the morning, loud and commanding, seeking to unnerve Temujin's forces. Yet the young Khan met him with calm eyes, a silent confidence that refused to bow to intimidation. The air between them hummed with tension, and for a fleeting moment, the steppe was silent, holding its breath. Then, with a subtle signal, Temujin's forces moved, not with frenzy but with deliberate, measured intent. The battle began. Horses thundered, boots struck earth, and the clash of weaponry echoed like muted drums. Yet even in chaos, Temujin maintained a whisper control, guiding each maneuver, protecting each flank, and ensuring his men moved as one living entity. He did not seek to crush Jamukha recklessly, nor to destroy the man who had once been a brother. He sought to assert a vision, to demonstrate that loyalty, strategy, and earned respect could triumph over inherited authority. Amid the skirmish, Temujin's mind remained clear, observing, calculating, adapting. He saw the fear in some of Jamukha's men, the hesitation in their ranks, the cracks forming in their unity. Slowly, deliberately, he exploited them, guiding his forces to outflank, to surround, to control the pace without ever forcing a headlong charge. Every movement was a lesson, every decision a quiet testament to the growth of a leader who had survived exile, betrayal, and loss. By midday, Jamukha's lines began to falter, Not because of Temujin's strength alone, but because of the cohesion he had nurtured, the loyalty earned through understanding, and the quiet authority that inspired trust rather than demanded fear. Temujin himself remained at the center, a calm presence, a beacon around which his allies gravitated, drawing courage from his steady gaze. Even as victory became visible, he did not gloat. He treated the fallen with measured respect, tending to the wounded, speaking softly to those who faltered in fear or doubt. His focus was not destruction, but the shaping of order from chaos, the building of a foundation stronger than any single battle. The first major victory was his, yet the weight of what had been accomplished rested softly on him. The steppe had seen his rising authority, but Jamuka's shadow still loomed. This victory was only a beginning, a demonstration that change was possible, but not inevitable. Alliances would shift, loyalties would be tested, and the landscape of power remained fragile. As night fell, Temujin rode quietly among his men, touching their shoulders, listening to their words, and understanding their fears. The fires of the camp flickered against the encroaching dark, a gentle glow of warmth and life, a contrast to the violence that had marked the day. Borte approached, her eyes reflecting both relief and quiet pride. She placed a hand on his arm, a silent affirmation that amidst all the upheaval, he remained the anchor not only of the steppe, but of the people he sought to lead. Temujin gazed toward the horizon where Jamuka had retreated, a storm still brewing in the distance. The boy who had once wandered the plains alone now understood the vastness of the challenge before him. Empires were not built in a single day. They were forged from patience, strategy, trust, and the courage to endure even when victory seemed distant. And as the fires crackled and the wind whispered through the grass, Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The rising Khan had shown his strength, but the steppe still demanded more. Each victory, each alliance, each choice would ripple outward, shaping not only his destiny, but the destiny of all who called the vast plains their home. The story of Genghis Khan was only beginning to unfold, and the rising Khan, tempered by hardship and guided by vision, was ready to face the challenges that lay ahead, step by measured step, whisper by whisper, under the endless sky of the Mongolian plains. The dawn was soft, spilling pale light across the steppe like a gentle promise rather than a harsh glare of confrontation. Temujin moved through his camp with a quiet purpose, each gesture deliberate, each glance observing the world as if it were a vast, living map. The men who followed him were no longer merely warriors. They had become extensions of his will, their loyalty rooted in understanding rather than fear. They trusted him because he had walked a path of hardship and emerged not bitter, but measured, thoughtful, and wise. He gathered his closest advisors in a circle by the rising sun, their faces shadowed and reflective, attuned to the gravity of the moment. "Strength is not in the clash of swords alone," he whispered, soft yet firm, "but in foresight, in understanding, in the bonds we forge before the storm arrives. Jamuka seeks to test us, but we must be ready not only to fight, but to endure, to outlast, and to bind loyalty with respect." His words carried like wind across the plains, settling deep into the hearts of those who listened. Temujin had learned that leadership was a quiet art. Each promise kept, each act of fairness, each measured step forward was a lesson to his followers. They absorbed his guidance, not as commands, but as a gentle shaping of a path they wished to follow. The camp buzzed softly, alive with planning, preparation, and the subtle energy of people who believed in the vision of a leader who saw further than the horizon itself. Borte moved among them, her presence a quiet anchor. She did not speak often, but when she did, her words carried weight. She reminded Temujin of a humanity that tempered his ambition, the steadiness that allowed him to pause, reflect, and calculate. In her eyes, he found reassurance, a gentle reminder that even as the steppe demanded ruthlessness, the heart must remain unbroken, compassionate, and wise. As the day unfolded, scouts returned with reports of Jamuka's maneuvers. The rival Khan was consolidating forces, attempting to sway smaller tribes with promises and intimidation. Temujin listened carefully, digesting each detail. He did not rush to react. Instead, he shaped his response like a sculptor shaping clay, deliberate and precise. Alliances were strengthened through personal attention. He rode to distant camps, spoke with their leaders in the quiet of dawn or dusk, understanding their fears, honoring their loyalties, and ensuring that each felt valued. The young Khan understood something few others did. True power was invisible. It was a trust nurtured in silence, the respect earned in patience, the subtle assurance that one's voice mattered in the great tide of the steppe. And as his influence expanded, Temujin sensed a slow, inexorable shift beneath the surface of tribal politics. The winds of change whispered promises of greater power, but only if he could guide it with care, intelligence, and the quiet force of conviction. Night fell again, soft and expansive, the stars gleaming like distant lanterns across the endless sky. Temujin rode alone to a small rise overlooking his camp, the horses below resting in clusters, the fires casting gentle glows across the earth. The tension of the day had ebbed, leaving only the reflective pulse of strategy, foresight, and anticipation. He knew that Jamukha would not relent, that the rival Khan's pride would demand further tests. But Temujin was ready. Each lesson from the past, betrayal, loss, hardship, and resilience, had prepared him for this moment. He allowed himself a breath, letting the wind brush his face, carrying with it the faint scent of grass, smoke, and distant water. In the quiet, he envisioned the steppe not as a battlefield, but as a living network, each tribe, each ally, each soldier a thread woven into a tapestry of future unity. This vision required patience, subtlety, and the ability to remain calm even as storms threatened. He had learned that rash decisions, even in victory, could unravel what had been carefully constructed. Borte joined him at the edge of the rise, her eyes reflecting the same horizon he studied. She placed a hand on his shoulder, a silent signal of trust and shared resolve. They did not need words. The bond between them was deep, a quiet understanding that strength alone was insufficient without wisdom, patience, and loyalty. Together, they looked out over the endless plains, the fires of their camp below flickering gently like stars fallen to earth. The night carried a whisper of inevitability, a reminder that the coming days would test every bond, every strategy, and every ounce of patience Temujin had cultivated. Yet he did not waver. The boy who had once wanted to step alone now stood at the center of a growing empire of loyalty and vision, ready to guide the rising tide of history with measured hands, a steady heart, and a mind unshaken by fear or doubt. And so, as the wind sighed softly through the grass, the stage was set. Temujin's alliances were strengthened, his strategies carefully placed, and the shadow of Jamukha loomed on the horizon, a silent challenge that would soon ignite into events shaping the destiny of the steppe and the legend of the Khan whose vision would endure beyond time itself. The first rays of dawn stretched across the steppe, painting the horizon in soft amber and rose, a gentle light upon a land poised between conflict and destiny. Temujin's forces moved quietly, disciplined, yet alive with the energy of anticipation. Every rider, every horse, every bow and spear felt the rhythm of the moment, the silent drumbeat of history pressing forward. The air was thick with expectation, yet calmness enveloped Temujin like a protective cloak. He had prepared, guided, and nurtured this moment with the patience of one who understood that true power grows in whispers, not shouts. Jamukha appeared on the horizon, banners snapping the wind, the pride of lineage radiating from his men like heat from stone. Yet even as the rival Khan's forces drew near, Temujin remained poised, unshaken. He had studied the movements of the steppe, the inclinations of men, and the fragile bonds of loyalty that shaped their decisions. Each glance, each whispered counsel, each adjustment in his line was deliberate, as though he were composing a quiet symphony of strategy, letting the chaos of battle flow in harmony with the calm certainty of vision. The clash began with a subdued intensity. Hoves struck earth softly but purposefully. Arrows cut the air in measured arcs, and the men of Temujin moved as one living organism, responding to his guidance with instinctive precision. Jamukha sought to dominate through sheer presence, the weight of his birthright pressing against the minds of those who followed him. Yet Temujin countered not with force alone, but with foresight, exploiting gaps, weaving his allies into positions that balanced defense with opportunity. Every maneuver reflected patience, understanding, and the quiet authority that had grown from hardship and reflection. Hours passed like flowing water. The battle was slow, deliberate rhythm rather than a frantic storm. Temujin's forces did not merely fight. They endured, adapted, and shaped the course of events with intelligence and unity. He treated the wounded with care, encouraged the hesitant, and inspired those who faltered, demonstrating that leadership was more than command. It was a cultivation of trust, courage, and the quiet assurance that every life mattered. By late afternoon, Jamuka's forces wavered, not from sudden defeat, but from the relentless precision and subtle authority of Temujin's command. The rival Khan's pride remained intact, yet cracks appeared in his cohesion. Temujin allowed no celebration, no premature triumph. Instead, he gathered his men close, speaking softly about endurance, foresight, and the future that still lay beyond the battlefield. Each word was a gentle reminder that today's victory was but a step in a much longer journey, a journey that demanded wisdom, patience, and a continued cultivation of alliances. As evening approached, Temujin withdrew his forces strategically, leaving Jamuka's army intact but subdued, a demonstration of power tempered by foresight. It was not total conquest, but a lesson. Strength is not only in victory, but in restraint, in vision, in the shaping of the hearts of men. Around the campfires, his followers whispered in admiration and awe, recognizing that they followed not a boy who had survived hardship, but a Khan whose understanding of the steps surpassed that of any who had come before. Borte stood beside him as the fires flickered, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Her presence was a quiet affirmation, a gentle tether to humanity that tempered his ambition. "You have guided them well," she murmured, her voice carrying a calm reassurance. "The steppe bends to you, not because of fear, but because they trust a man who stands with them." Temujin allowed himself a small, rare smile, feeling the truth in her words, yet aware that the tides of history would demand more of him still. As night fully descended, a soft wind swept across the plains, rustling the grass like whispered secrets. Temujin gazed toward the distant horizon, knowing that Jamuka would return, that rivalries and alliances would continue to shift, and that the challenges ahead would grow ever more complex. Yet he also understood that each choice, each bond, and each act of measured strategy had strengthened not only his power, but the foundation of the empire he envisioned. The chapter of the rising Khan drew to a close not with finality, but with quiet reflection. Temujin had endured, learned, and subtly triumphed. The steppe had whispered its secrets, and he had listened. The boy who had wandered alone in fear had grown into a leader whose vision began to reshape the destiny of countless lives. Yet the story was far from over. The plain stretched endlessly before him, alive with possibility, danger, and the subtle, inexorable pull of history yet to be written. And so, as the fires dimmed and the wind sighed through the grass, Temujin remained on the ridge, silent, reflective, and poised. The first major battles were behind him, but the path forward stretched infinitely, carrying whispers of empires, alliances, betrayals, and triumphs. The rising Khan understood that destiny awaited not just in the outcome of battles, but in the careful cultivation of loyalty, vision, and the quiet, enduring strength of the human heart. And as the night deepened, the steppe held its breath, ready to witness the continuing journey of Genghis Khan, a journey that would forever change the world. The morning air stretched across the steppe like silk, soft and endless, carrying the scent of dew, distant rivers, and the faint warmth of fires left from the night. Temujin rose atop a small ridge, his eyes scanning the horizon, the pale light illuminating the endless expanse of grass and sky. The battle with Jamuka had passed, yet the echoes of that confrontation lingered, subtle as the rustle of the wind, reminding him that leadership demanded more than strength. It demanded vision, patience, and the quiet cultivation of trust. Temujin's mind traced the web of alliances he had begun to weave. Tribes once wary now approached with cautious respect, their leaders testing his character, their eyes searching for the truth behind the boy who had grown into a rising Khan. He listened, spoke softly, and observed with deliberate attention, knowing that each word, each gesture, could sway loyalties as decisively as any sword. The plains were alive with possibility, but only for those who understood its rhythms, the subtle current of ambition, fear, and hope that moved beneath the surface of every encampment. Borte moved alongside him, her presence a quiet anchor to the rising tides of responsibility. She did not demand attention, nor did she speak unnecessarily. Yet in her calm gaze, Temujin found reflection, clarity, and reassurance. She reminded him that power without humanity was hollow, and that the hearts of those who followed him were as important as the strategies he devised. Together, they traversed the camps, touching the shoulders of soldiers, listening to the fears of leaders, and allowing each individual to feel seen, valued, and understood. The steppe itself seemed to respond to their unity. Horses moved with an almost intuitive grace. The fires of distant camps flickered like quiet beacons, and the wind carried with faint whispers of agreement, acknowledgement, and cautious hope. Temujin understood that the first battles were not only tests of skill, but also tests of character. The tribes would follow not merely the man who could fight, but the man who could inspire, listen, and guide with both strength and patience. By mid-morning, news arrived of smaller tribes seeking to join his growing network. Some came reluctantly, still loyal to Jamuka in sentiment, yet curious about the boy who had survived exile, betrayal, and hardship to rise with unmatched calm and vision. Temujin welcomed them, speaking softly of unity, shared purpose, and the greater promise of steppe where alliances were honored, loyalty was earned, and leadership was measured not by birth, but by the integrity and courage of the one who led. The day passed in a rhythm of preparation, quiet counsel, and measured exploration. Temujin moved among his people, observing how the alliances began to intertwine, how trust grew not by coercion, but by respect and careful attention. Even the smallest gestures mattered. A shared meal, a word of acknowledgement, a gentle correction, each contributing to the growing web of influence that would soon stretch across the vast plains. As dusk approached, the horizon blushed with gentle hues of orange and rose, the sun sinking slowly behind distant hills. Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of pause atop a ridge, his gaze drifting across the endless landscape. In the distance, scouts reported movements of Jamuka, reminders that rivalry still lingered, subtle but insistent. Yet the rising Khan did not tense. He had learned that the storms of the steppe could be weathered with foresight, patience, and strategy. Each challenge was an opportunity, each confrontation a chance to teach, inspire, and consolidate the loyalty he had so carefully nurtured. Borte stood quietly beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. "The steppe bends to those who understand it," she murmured, her voice barely audible above the whisper of the wind. "And you have begun to bend it with patience, not force." Her words carried a quiet truth, and Temujin allowed himself a soft smile, knowing that the foundation he was building would endure, not through fear, but through wisdom, fairness, and steadfast vision. Night settled gently across the plains, stars appearing like distant lanterns, each one a witness to the birth of alliances and the shaping of destiny. Temujin's camp glowed softly in the darkness, a quiet heartbeat of life, order, and promise amidst a vast, untamed land. He knew that the steppe would demand more, larger alliances, tougher tests of loyalty, and the forging of strategies that could withstand both ambition and betrayal. Yet for the first time, he felt a sense of calm authority, a knowing that the journey ahead, while daunting, was navigable with patience, intelligence, and a quiet power of earned respect. And so, as the night deepened, Temujin looked toward the distant horizon, the rising Khan of the steppe ready to face challenges yet unseen, alliances yet untested, and a destiny that would stretch far beyond the grass and sky of his childhood home. The story of Genghis Khan continued to unfold, carried softly on the wind, whispered through grass, and etched into the hearts of all who followed him. The morning mist clung to the steppe like a soft veil, muting the edges of hills and rivers, as if nature itself paused to witness the subtle shaping of destiny. Temujin rode slowly through the camps of his growing alliances, the soft sound of hooves against dew-kissed grass a quiet cadence of reassurance. Each tribe he encountered carried its own history, pride, and fear, yet they came to him willingly, drawn by the gentle authority he radiated, a calm that promised order without oppression, loyalty without coercion. He stopped to speak with the elders of a small, remote tribe whose loyalty had long been uncertain. Their eyes, clouded by years of mistrust and survival, searched his face for signs of deception, weakness, or ambition unchecked by reason. Temujin spoke softly, deliberately, weaving words of vision and shared purpose, emphasizing unity and fairness over force and fear. He did not demand allegiance. He offered it as a gift earned by respect and understanding. Slowly, the elders nodded, a quiet acknowledgement that their future could be safer, more prosperous, and more honorable under his guidance than under the fractious rule of rival Khans. Borte followed at a gentle distance, her presence steady and reassuring. She did not speak often, yet her gaze and subtle gestures reminded Temujin that the foundation of leadership rested not only on strategy, but on humanity. In the quiet moments between the discussions with tribal leaders, she would brush a hand across his shoulder or whisper a soft encouragement. Her calmness tempered the storm of decisions, allowing him to move forward with measured wisdom rather than impulsive force. By midday, the network of alliances began to coalesce. Tribes once isolated or skeptical now spoke of mutual protection, shared prosperity, and the promise of a leader who valued them not as subordinates, but as partners in a shared destiny. Temujin observed the subtle shifts in loyalty, noting where mistrust lingered and where confidence had taken root. Each gesture, each word, each gentle negotiation contributed to the invisible web of power he was weaving, a tapestry stronger than any single army, stretching across the plains like an unseen river of influence. Yet even amidst this calm, the shadow of Jamukha lingered. Scouts reported movements on the northern horizon, small detachments, probing attacks, subtle tests of strength and resolve. Temujin knew these were not random. They were the opening measures of a rivalry that would test not only his armies, but the very foundation of the alliances he had nurtured. He did not respond with anger or rashness. Instead, he moved quietly, adjusting positions, strengthening communication between allied camps, and ensuring that even the smallest tribes felt both seen and protected. Strategy, he knew, was built not on the immediate clash of swords, but on the patience to anticipate, adapt, and endure. As the day waned, Temujin rode to a small rise overlooking combined camps. The fires below flickered gently in the growing dusk, each one a soft pulse of life and loyalty. The horses rested quietly, and the men moved among one another with a sense of shared purpose that contrasted sharply with the fractured forces of Jamukha. In this quiet observation, Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. He remembered the boy who had once wandered alone, hunted by rivals and abandoned by circumstance. Now he stood surrounded by loyalty earned, alliances nurtured, and a vision that stretched beyond the horizon. Borte joined him at the ridge, her eyes tracing the same distant horizon he watched. "The steppe listens to you," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the soft sigh of the wind. "And the tribes respond, not because of fear, but because you have shown them what it means to be led with both strength and care." Temujin felt the weight of her words settle into his chest like a soft ember, warming his resolve. The journey ahead would demand courage, patience, and wisdom. But for the first time, he sensed that the foundation was strong enough to carry him through the storms to come. Night fell, and the horizon deepened into shades of indigo and violet. Jamukha's forces, though not yet fully engaged, had begun to probe the outer limits of Temujin's growing network. The first subtle signs of challenge whispered across the plains. Small skirmishes, minor betrayals, and movements that hinted at larger conflicts yet to arrive. Temujin did not flinch. The alliances he had nurtured, the trust he had earned, and the quiet authority he wielded were his strength. He understood that true power was not demonstrated in a single battle, but in the endurance, cohesion, and loyalty that persisted long after the initial clash. The night was still, broken only by the distant calls of wolves and the gentle crackle of fires. Temujin stood on the ridge, watching over the men and tribes who had chosen to follow him. The vast steppe, endless and open, seemed almost to bend beneath his vision, alive with the quiet promise of unity, strength, and purpose. He felt the pulse of history beneath his feet, the soft rhythm of destiny calling him forward, whispering of the empires yet to come and the challenges that would demand all his patience, courage, and foresight. And so, as the stars glittered above the endless plains, Temujin prepared for the next steps. Larger alliances, greater tests, and the subtle, inexorable rise of a Khan who would reshape not only the steppe, but the world itself. The stage was set, the players in motion, and the story of Genghis Khan continued to unfold, one quiet, deliberate, and inexorably powerful step at a time. The steppe breathed softly in the early morning, a silent witness to the unfolding drama of loyalty and rivalry. Temujin's gaze swept over the camps below, each fire flickering like a heartbeat of trust, each rider moving with quiet purpose. The days of preparation, counsel, and subtle negotiation were about to meet their first true test. Jamukha, relentless in his ambition and pride, had begun to mobilize larger forces. probing the edges of Temujin's network, seeking cracks in the fragile web of alliances that had taken months to weave. Yet the rising Khan did not stir panic among his people. He moved with calm precision, consulting with his advisors in hushed tones, observing the nuances of body language, listening to the faintest ripple of concern in the voices of allied leaders. Each detail mattered. A hesitation, a faltering glance, a subtle shift in posture. Temujin had learned that battles were won long before swords clashed, not merely through strength, but through understanding, foresight, and the quiet cultivation of trust. The first skirmishes were gentle, almost imperceptible, a whisper of conflict rather than a roar. Jamuka's detachments tested boundaries, seeking to challenge his authority without provoking a full confrontation. Temujin observed, allowing small defeats in isolated encounters, using them as lessons for both his men and his enemies. Each retreat, each maneuver, was deliberate, a subtle teaching in patience, strategy, and endurance. His allies watched and learned, understanding that leadership was more than mere command. It was a shaping of character, the nurturing of confidence, and the quiet, steady guidance of hearts and minds. Borte's presence remained a constant source of calm. She moved through the camps, offering quiet reassurance to the anxious, observing the young Khan with an understanding that went beyond words. In her calm gaze, Temujin found balance. In her soft words, he discovered reflection. She reminded him that while strategy shaped battles, it was patience, empathy, and measured action that forged lasting bonds that would endure far beyond any single confrontation. By the afternoon, the tension thickened. Jamuka's forces pushed further, forcing Temujin's allies to make decisions that tested loyalty and courage. He did not command blindly. He guided softly, offering counsel and support, allowing each tribe to act with both freedom and unity. In these moments, he saw the subtle signs of growth, the way his alliances moved in harmony, the trust his men had cultivated, and the quiet determination that each leader carried as they faced the shadow of Jamuka's ambition. Even as the crisis unfolded, Temujin remained calm, almost serene. His mind mapped possibilities like constellations in the night sky, each choice, each action, forming part of a larger design. He knew that rash action would unravel the delicate threads of unity he had spent so long nurturing. Strength without wisdom, he had learned, could destroy what patience had built. Every decision, every word was measured, flowing like water over stone, gentle, persistent, and shaping the landscape in ways unseen until the results revealed themselves. As twilight fell, a minor confrontation erupted on the northern ridge. Horses collided, arrows arced across the sky, and shouts echoed faintly through the distance. Yet Temujin's calm had rippled through his forces. His allies moved with precision, each action purposeful, each retreat deliberate. The skirmish ended without catastrophe, and Jamuka withdrew with subtle fury, recognizing, perhaps too late, that brute force alone could not dismantle the web of loyalty Temujin had woven. Night settled, soft and deep, covering the steppe with a blanket of stars. Fires flickered gently, and the men of Temujin's growing coalition gathered close, the tension of the day easing into reflective calm. He walked among them, placing a hand lightly on shoulders, offering quiet encouragement, and ensuring that every voice was heard, every concern addressed. In these moments, the rising Khan revealed a truth that would echo for years to come. Leadership is not measured by victories alone, but by the resilience, unity, and trust of those who follow. Borte joined him once more atop the ridge, the fires of camp casting soft glows across her face. "You have guided them well," she murmured, her voice like the wind brushing the grass. "The steppe tests you, yet you do not break. They follow because they see wisdom, patience, and care in every step you take." Temujin felt the quiet warmth of her words settle into him, a soft ember of reassurance and strength. The crisis had tested him, but it had also revealed the depth of the loyalty, skill, and unity he had cultivated. And as the wind whispered through the tall grasses, carrying with it the distant echoes of Jamuka's retreat, Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The alliances he had built had held. The subtle, patient guidance he had practiced had proven true. The story of the steppe, of Genghis Khan's rising power, continued to unfold, not in sudden bursts of violence alone, but in measured, deliberate steps of wisdom, foresight, and enduring leadership. The night was still, yet alive with possibility. Tomorrow would bring new tests, new challenges, and the next steps in the journey of the boy who would become a Khan. And as the fires glimmered and the stars shimmered above, Temujin's gaze stretched across the horizon, knowing that the greatest challenges and the most enduring triumphs were still ahead, waiting quietly beneath the endless sky of the Mongolian plains. The steppe lay quiet beneath the fading light, the last glow of sunset casting long shadows across the grass like gentle whispers of the day's trials. Temujin stood atop a ridge, watching his forces move in harmony below, the fires of camp glowing softly like tiny constellations scattered across the vast plains. The skirmishes with Jamuka had tested the loyalty and courage of every tribe, yet the alliances he had nurtured had held firm, each bond strengthened by both challenge and shared purpose. He moved among his allies as the night settled, listening more than speaking, allowing each leader to feel both valued and seen. In these quiet moments, he understood the true strength of the steppe, not in armies or swords, but in the hearts of those who chose to follow. He spoke softly of vision, unity, and the subtle power of patience. Words carried weight, not in force, but in meaning, and each was absorbed with reverent attention. The lessons of hardship, loss, and endurance were etched into the minds of those who had chosen this path, and in their eyes, Temujin saw a reflection of his own resolve. Borte's presence, steady and calm, reminded him of the delicate balance between strategy and humanity. She moved quietly among the camps, her gentle gestures offering reassurance to the anxious and comfort to the weary. In her soft glance, Temujin felt the affirmation of shared purpose and a quiet reminder that the heart, even amidst ambition and power, must remain grounded, compassionate, and wise. She embodied the calm after the storm, the enduring warmth that tempered the relentless pace of the steppe. The night deepened, and whispers came from the scouts. Jamuka's forces were regrouping, preparing for further movements. Yet Temujin did not fear. The small victories, subtle displays of foresight, and unwavering leadership had begun to ripple outward. He had learned that confrontation alone did not secure loyalty, and that restraint and wisdom often yielded outcomes stronger than the fiercest engagement. By guiding rather than dominating, he had shaped a network of alliances resilient enough to withstand the tests ahead. Around the flickering campfires, discussions of strategy blended with quiet reflection. Soldiers spoke softly of their experiences, of moments where patience had won over rash action, of the subtle lessons taught by their young Khan. Temujin listened, his presence calming, his attention unwavering. He knew that leadership was measured not in immediate victories, but in enduring trust, understanding, and cohesion cultivated over time. Every whispered acknowledgement, every quiet nod of agreement, strengthened the invisible threads that held the alliance together. As the moon rose, pale and luminous over the endless plains, Temujin allowed himself a long, reflective moment. The boy who had once wandered alone now stood at the center of a growing coalition, his vision stretching across the steppe, shaping the hearts and minds of men who would follow him not out of fear, but because they believed in him. Each alliance, each careful negotiation, and each quiet demonstration of wisdom had brought him closer to the destiny he sensed waiting on the horizon, a destiny vast as the plains themselves. Borte joined him atop the ridge, her eyes tracing the silver light of the moon across the camp below. "You have guided them well," she whispered, her voice blending with the sigh of the wind. "The steppe listens to you, and they trust the hands that lead with care." Temujin nodded, the quiet warmth of her words settling like a soft ember in his chest. Even as challenges continued to gather, he felt the steady assurance that the foundation he had built was strong enough to support the trials ahead. And so, as the night deepened and the fires of camp flickered like distant stars, Temujin allowed his mind to wander gently over the path yet to come. Jamuka's shadow still lingered, alliances remained delicate, and the tides of rivalry and opportunity continued to shift. Yet in the calm cadence of plains, the whispering wind and the quiet strength of his growing coalition, he sensed the enduring rhythm of destiny, one shaped by patience, wisdom, and the steady, unwavering heart of Khan who would leave the steppe forever changed. The chapter closed with quiet reflection rather than finality. The alliances had endured, the network of loyalty had strengthened, and Temujin's understanding of leadership deepened with each challenge. The plain stretched endlessly ahead, carrying the promise of new confrontations, greater unities, and the subtle, inexorable unfolding of a destiny far larger than any single battle. And as the night held the steppe in a gentle embrace, the story of Genghis Khan's rise continued, soft yet powerful, whispering of empires yet to come, and of the quiet, deliberate shaping of history beneath the endless Mongolian sky. The steppe stretched endlessly beneath the silver light of a rising moon, its vastness both quiet and alive, as if every blade of grass held a memory of countless battles and whispered destinies. Temujin stood atop a gentle ridge, his gaze sweeping across the soft glow of campfires and the dark silhouettes of distant riders. The day had tested alliances, patience, and judgment, yet his network of loyalty had endured. Every gesture of trust, every quiet act of guidance, had formed a lattice stronger than any blade or bow. Jamukha's shadow lingered still, a reminder that power was never absolute, and that the currents of rivalry and ambition flowed endlessly across the plains. Scouts reported minor disturbances along the northern passes, movements meant to unsettle, to test, to challenge the cohesion he had so carefully nurtured. Temujin received these reports with calm, absorbing each word as part of a larger rhythm. The young Khan understood that true strength lay not in the instant clash of forces, but in enduring strategy, foresight, and the subtle shaping of hearts and minds. He moved through the camp, touching shoulders, offering quiet encouragement, and listening to the voices of his allies. Each nod, each whispered acknowledgement, strengthened the invisible threads that bound the coalition together. In these soft interactions, Temujin revealed the essence of his leadership, a balance of wisdom, patience, and humanity that ensured loyalty was earned and not demanded. Even in the face of Jamukha's looming presence, his people felt calm, confident, and connected, a reflection of the Khan who guided them not with fear, but with understanding. Borte joined him on the ridge, her gaze tracing the distant horizon where the steppe blurred into the night. "The storms are not yet over," she whispered, her voice gentle as the wind. "But you have shown them the strength of patience and care. They follow not only because of power, but because they trust a heart that guides them." Temujin nodded, the quiet warmth of her words settling into his chest. The journey ahead was still fraught with uncertainty, yet the foundation of his growing empire had been tested and held strong. The night deepened, the fires of the camps cast a soft, golden glow that mirrored the constellations above. Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, feeling the pulse of history beneath his feet, the gentle heartbeat of destiny carried across the plains. He thought of the boy who had once wandered alone, hunted by rivals, and abandoned by circumstance. Now he stood surrounded by loyalty, trust, and purpose, a Khan whose vision stretched far beyond the horizon, shaping not just armies, but the hearts of those who followed him. Soft winds whispered through the grass, carrying faint echoes of Jamukha's presence, a subtle warning that challenges remained. Yet Temujin's resolve did not waver. The alliances he had forged were resilient, tempered by trust and shared purpose. Every tribe, every rider, every voice within his coalition understood that the path ahead demanded patience, foresight, and unwavering attention. The Khan had learned that true power was a quiet force, built through understanding and reflection as much as through strength or conquest. As the night wore on, the steppe seemed to pause, holding its breath in anticipation. Temujin's mind traced the currents of loyalty and ambition, the subtle shifts that would shape the next confrontations. He knew that larger challenges awaited, forces that would test the very bonds he had cultivated, enemies who would seek to unravel the delicate web of trust he had so carefully woven. Yet within him burned a quiet certainty. The boy who had survived exile, hardship, and betrayal had grown into a Khan capable of meeting destiny itself. And so, as the fires flickered and the stars shimmered above, Temujin looked toward the distant horizon. The current chapter of his rise was drawing to a close, marked not by a single victory, but by the enduring strength of alliances, the subtle power of patience, and the quiet shaping of the steppe beneath his vision. The story of Genghis Khan continued to unfold, carried softly on the wind, whispered through grass, and etched into hearts of those who would follow him. The plains remained vast and open, the night both a blanket and a promise. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, larger battles, and the subtle testing of loyalty that defined leadership on the steppe. Yet for now, Temujin allowed himself the quiet reflection of achievement, a calm acknowledgement that the forces of unity and wisdom had endured. The stage was set for the next chapter of destiny, where alliances would strengthen, rivals would test their mettle, and the rise of a Khan would continue to echo across the endless Mongolian horizon. And as the steppe whispered under the gentle sweep of night, one truth remained clear. The story was far from over, yet every step forward had been deliberate, every bond strengthened, and every moment prepared the world for quiet, inexorable rise of a legend. Dawn stretched gently across the endless steppe, spilling pale gold and rose across the rolling grasslands. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of morning dew, and the soft sound of horses shifting in their stalls blended with the distant cry of birds waking to the new day. Temujin stood at the edge of a small ridge, his eyes tracing the horizon, a quiet calm settling over him. The alliances of yesterday had held. The loyalty of his growing coalition had proven resilient, and now a larger vision began to unfold, one that reached beyond the familiar plains into territories vast and untamed. The Khan's mind traced the possibilities like constellations. Each move, each alliance, each strategy a star in the expanding map of power. He considered the challenges ahead, rival tribes, unsettled loyalties, and distant lands that had yet to feel the steady touch of his influence. Yet he did not feel fear. The years of hardship, exile, and loss had tempered him, forging patience, wisdom, and an instinct for balance that guided every decision. Leadership, he had learned, was less about command than about foresight, less about victory in a single battle than about the enduring trust of those who followed. Borte moved beside him, her presence as steady as a slow wind across the plains. She did not speak, yet in the quiet exchange of glances, Temujin felt reassurance, reflection, and clarity. The weight of the empire, the responsibility of alliances stretching across the steppe, was heavy, but shared. Together, they walked through the camps of allied tribes, observing, listening, and gently guiding. Each tribe carried its own history, pride, and wariness, yet all now turned toward a vision that promised unity, safety, and shared purpose. The first movements of expansion were subtle. Scouts ventured beyond known territories, bringing back reports of distant rivers, forests, and settlements. Temujin considered each carefully, mapping routes, evaluating resources, and imagining the interplay of power and diplomacy. He spoke quietly with his generals, guiding without demanding, listening without judgment, and shaping strategies that blended foresight with the humane treatment of both allies and conquered peoples. Each plan was deliberate. Each decision weighed not only for immediate gain, but for the long art of loyalty, trust, and enduring influence. By midday, the rhythm of the growing empire became apparent. Camps moved in measured harmony, messages carried swiftly but softly between allies, and scouts returned with news of both opportunity and caution. Minor confrontations with distant tribes were handled not with immediate violence, but with negotiation, demonstration of strength tempered by fairness, and the quiet persuasion of wisdom. Temujin understood that conquest was as much about the hearts of people as it was about armies. A tribe persuaded by respect will remain loyal far longer than one subdued by force alone. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the plains, Temujin allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. He thought of the boy who had once wandered alone, hunted by rivals and abandoned by circumstance, and now saw him surrounded by a growing empire, alliances stretching across the land, and a vision that extended beyond the reach of any single tribe. The steppe itself seemed to hum with possibility, responding subtly to the deliberate, careful shaping of one who understood its rhythms, its dangers, and its quiet promise. Borte joined him atop the ridge, her gaze tracing the golden horizon. "The plains are vast," she whispered, "and yet they bend to those who move with patience and care. You have begun to shape more than lands. You are shaping hearts and minds." Temujin felt the quiet warmth of her words settle deep within him. The empire was young, fragile, and full of challenges. Yet in this soft dawn, he sensed the first true bloom of power, the slow, deliberate unfolding of an influence that would ripple far beyond the steppe. Nightfall arrived gently, and the fires of the camps flickered like tiny beacons across the darkening grass. Scouts returned with new reports, distant rivals testing boundaries, unsettled loyalties, and lands untouched by the authority of any Khan. Yet even these whispers of challenge did not stir fear in Temujin. Instead, They were the quiet markers of growth, opportunities to guide, to persuade, and to shape. In the subtle interplay of power, patience, and wisdom, he saw not only the path to conquest, but the path to enduring legacy. And so, as the steppe settled beneath a blanket of stars, the young Khan traced the soft lines of rivers, forests, and distant ridges, imagining the network of alliances and territories that would soon feel the steady, deliberate shaping of his hand. The story of Genghis Khan continued, not in sudden bursts of violence, but in quiet, measured steps across the vast expanse of plains, each movement a whisper of destiny, each decision a gentle shaping of history yet to come. The steppe awoke beneath a delicate veil of mist, each blade of grass glistening with dew, as if the earth itself had exhaled a soft sigh. Temujin rode among his men, the quiet sound of hooves blending seamlessly with the low murmur of the wind. The empire he envisioned was no longer a distant dream. It began to take shape in deliberate, careful movements, in the alignment of tribes, and in the subtle orchestration of forces across the vast plains. The first campaigns were guided by patience and precision. Temujin did not rush into battle, but measured every move, assessing the terrain, the loyalties of local tribes, and the disposition of potential rivals. Scouts returned with whispers of distant settlements, small fortifications, and tribes who had yet to swear fealty. Each report was absorbed thoughtfully, every decision weighed with care. In the calm cadence of his planning, there was a quiet artistry, a rhythm that blended strategy with the subtle shaping of trust and respect. When the first skirmishes erupted, they were swift and decisive, yet tempered with restraint. Temujin's forces moved as one, coordinated and fluid, minimizing unnecessary loss while demonstrating the undeniable strength of the growing coalition. Battles were not mere clashes of swords, but carefully choreographed movements, each strike and maneuver carrying the weight of foresight and intention. The tribes who witnessed these early campaigns began to understand the emerging difference in leadership. Power wielded with wisdom, tempered by patience, and guided by the steady hand of Khan who valued loyalty and life alongside conquest. Borte remained nearby, a calm presence among the camps, her quiet strength echoing to the hearts of those who followed. She offered reassurance to the anxious, comfort to weary, and subtle guidance to those uncertain of their place in the unfolding empire. In her gentle observation, Temujin found perspective, a reminder that every victory, every alliance, and every campaign was shaped not only by strategy, but by the care taken in nurturing the bonds that held his growing empire together. As days passed, the effect of these campaigns began to ripple across the steppe. Tribes once isolated and wary now spoke a unity of shared purpose and the quiet authority that Temujin had established. Word traveled swiftly of his fair and deliberate guidance, his capacity to balance strength with wisdom, and the subtle but undeniable pull of loyalty that flowed from the example he set. The young Khan's influence expanded not only through territory, but through the hearts and minds of the people who followed him willingly, inspired by vision rather than fear. Even as victories accumulated, challenges remained. Minor uprisings and rival factions tested the cohesion of his alliances, forcing Temujin to navigate the delicate interplay of power, persuasion, and trust. He listened carefully, acted deliberately, and ensured that every decision strengthened the underlying unity rather than frayed it. Leadership on the steppe, he knew, was not proven by the swift fall of an enemy, but by the endurance and harmony of those who chose to stand with him after the dust of battle settled. Night fell quietly, and the steppe was bathed in the silver glow of moonlight. Fires flickered softly across the encampments, casting gentle shadows over faces tired but resolute. Temujin stood atop a low ridge, observing the coordinated movements of his forces, the loyalty of his allies, and the quiet reassurance of the land itself. The campaigns had tested strength, patience, and strategy, yet they had also revealed the profound potential of unity guided by a deliberate and steady hand. Borte joined him once more, her eyes reflecting the flickering lights below. "You are shaping more than victory," she whispered. "You are shaping hearts, minds, and a vision that will endure far beyond these battles." Temujin nodded, the quiet warmth of her words grounding him. Each campaign, each challenge, and each subtle act of guidance contributed to the growing legacy of Khan who understood that conquest alone could not define him. The lasting impact would be measured in loyalty, unity, and the careful weaving of trust across the vast plains. And so, Under the stars that glittered like silent witnesses across the endless horizon, Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The steppe had begun to respond to his deliberate shaping. The initial campaigns had revealed both strengths and vulnerabilities, and the network of alliances had proven resilient even in the face of challenge. The story of Genghis Khan's rise continued, quietly powerful, unfolding in measured, deliberate steps that would ripple across the plains and into history yet to come. The horizon burned with the soft glow of dawn, a gentle promise of light that stretched across the endless steppe. Temujin rode quietly at the edge of his forces, the rhythmic sound of hooves blending with the soft murmur of the wind through the grasses. The campaign's expansion had begun to coalesce into something larger, a deliberate orchestration of tribes, strategy, and foresight, each movement measured with precision and care. The first larger battles loomed, not as chaotic clashes, but as the inevitable convergence of vision and resistance. Temujin's forces approached the enemy with a calm confidence born of preparation and patience. Scouts had mapped the terrain meticulously, noting every ridge, river, and hidden pathway, while messengers carried subtle signals and messages to ensure the seamless coordination of his growing army. In these moments, the battlefield was less a place of violence than a canvas for strategy, where every movement, every choice, was an intentional stroke shaping the outcome. When the engagement began, it unfolded with the quiet artistry of a well-rehearsed plan. Arrows arced in silent elegance across the sky. Horses moved in sweeping patterns that mirrored the contours of the land, and soldiers followed commands of their Khan with fluid precision. Temujin's tactical brilliance lay not in chaos, but in orchestration, the ability to predict, guide, and harmonize the energies of hundreds, then thousands, of warriors into a single, graceful expression of purpose. Victory did not roar. It emerged quietly, almost imperceptibly, yet with undeniable inevitability. Borte observed from a safe distance, her presence steady and calm, like the wind brushing the plains. She offered quiet reassurance to those who faltered, spoke softly to the young leaders anxious under the weight of responsibility, and reminded the Khan of the humanity that underpinned even the harshest decisions. Her influence was subtle yet profound. In her eyes, Temujin found reflection, perspective, and the stillness necessary to guide with both power and empathy. The impact of these early major victories rippled outward. Tribes that had once resisted now reconsidered, drawn not only by the force of arms, but by the demonstration of strategy, fairness, and unity. Messages of respect, allegiance, and cautious admiration traveled swiftly across the steppe. Temujin's reputation as a leader capable of combining relentless determination with deliberate wisdom began to precede him, shaping perceptions as powerfully as the battles themselves. Even as victories accumulated, challenges persisted. Rival Khans tested boundaries, alliances wavered under the pressure of distance and circumstance, and the terrain itself posed constant trials. Yet Temujin's approach remained consistent. Observe quietly, act deliberately, and nurture loyalty through both respect and guidance. He understood that the true measure of leadership was not merely winning battles, but creating enduring networks of trust, cohesion, and purpose that would outlast individual victories. As twilight fell, the steppe became a tapestry of shadow and light, the flickering fires of encampments glowing like scattered stars. Temujin walked among his men, listening, guiding, and reinforcing the bonds that had grown stronger with each challenge. The subtle interplay of command and consultation, the quiet affirmation of loyalty, and the soft reflection of mistakes and lessons learned had transformed his coalition into a resilient force, ready to face the uncertainties of tomorrow. Borte joined him on a ridge overlooking the camp. "You have shaped more than armies today," she whispered, her voice blending with the evening breeze. "You have shaped hearts and trust, the foundation upon which all victories will endure." Temujin nodded, the calm warmth of her words settling into his chest. He understood now, more clearly than ever, that the steppe yielded not only to strength, but to wisdom, patience, and the careful cultivation of loyalty and unity. Night deepened over the plains, a soft curtain of stars reflecting the quiet power of the moment. Temujin allowed himself a rare breath of reflection, feeling the pulse of history beneath his feet and the subtle shaping of a future that stretched across the horizon. The larger battles were only the beginning. The real challenge lay in sustaining influence, guiding alliances, and preparing for forces yet unseen. Yet in this still, luminous night, He sensed the quiet satisfaction of progress, the knowledge that careful preparation, deliberate action, and unwavering patience could turn the vast, untamed steppe into the stage of destiny. And so, as the campfires flickered and the stars shimmered above, Temujin's gaze extended across the horizon. The story of his rise continued, unfolding softly yet powerfully, a rhythm of strategy, trust, and quiet brilliance that would echo across the Mongolian plains and into the annals of history. The empire he envisioned was no longer just a dream. It was a living, breathing force, shaped by deliberate thought, careful alliances, and the gentle, inexorable hand of a Khan whose influence would change the world forever. The steppe lay beneath the soft haze of dawn, gentle light spilling across the rolling grasslands, each blade shimmering as if touched by the breath of history itself. Temujin rode slowly along the edges of his camp, observing the quiet movements of his people. The battles fought, the alliances forged, and the campaigns undertaken had begun to shape not only the land but the hearts of those who followed him. Each village visited, each tribe approached, became a thread in the vast tapestry of a nascent empire, woven delicately with patience, wisdom, and intent. The consolidation of power was a subtle art. Temujin understood that true dominance could not rely solely on victories in battle. It required diplomacy, empathy, and the quiet nurturing of trust. He met with tribal leaders under the soft light of morning, sharing words of encouragement, listening to their fears, and acknowledging their histories. In these moments, his presence was calming, reflective, and deliberate. No decree was issued without consideration, no action taken without foresight. The alliance is strengthened not by coercion, but by respect and mutual understanding. Borte remained nearby, a steady presence among the councils and discussions. Her quiet counsel was often the unseen force behind the Khan's decisions, grounding him in empathy and reminding him of the delicate balance between authority and care. Together, they guided their people with a vision that combined strategic brilliance with gentle humanity. The steppe itself seemed to respond to this harmony, the vast plain stretching endlessly, yet bending subtly toward the order, trust, and unity that Temujin cultivated. As days passed, minor disputes were resolved not with the clash of arms, but through dialogue and measured demonstration of authority. The tribes began to understand the emerging principle. Loyalty was earned, respect was cultivated, and the Khan's hand, though firm, was tempered by fairness. The once fragmented steppe began to hum with a quiet rhythm of coordination, each movement a horseman, each exchange of goods, and each shared story contributing to a growing sense of unity. Temujin also recognized that diplomacy extended beyond immediate alliances. Messages were sent to distant leaders, envoys traveled carefully through forests and rivers, and subtle negotiations ensured that potential rivals were engaged with intelligence, respect, and strategy. Even as expansion continued, he maintained a balance of strength and diplomacy, understanding that the foundation of an enduring empire required both force and finesse. Nightfall brought a soft hush over the plains. Fires flickered gently across the camps, casting warm light over faces weary yet resolute. Temujin walked among his people, his presence quiet but deeply felt. The consolidation of the empire was not measured by the number of conquered lands, but by the harmony, trust, and alignment of those who now followed him willingly. He felt the pulse of the steppe beneath him, a steady rhythm echoing the deliberate shaping of his vision, the unbroken trust of allies, and the quiet inevitability of destiny unfolding. Borte joined him atop a small ridge, the soft glow of moonlight illuminating her features. "You have done more than fight battles," she whispered, her voice gentle as the wind through the grasses. "You have shaped the hearts and minds of those who will follow you, and in that, the empire is already eternal." Temujin felt the warmth of her words settle deeply within him. The empire was no longer simply a collection of tribes and territories. It was a living network of trust, loyalty, and shared purpose, carefully nurtured through foresight, patience, and unwavering dedication. As the night deepened, Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection. The vast plains of Mongolia, once fractured by rivalry and discord, now resonated with a subtle hum of unity. Campaigns, alliances, and diplomacy had transformed the steppe into a foundation upon which the future could be built. The Khan sensed that larger challenges still awaited, that distant rivals would test the limits of his growing influence. Yet the quiet confidence that came from careful preparation, deliberate action, and deep understanding provided both solace and clarity. And so, as the fires flickered softly across the plains and the stars shimmered like distant witnesses above, Temujin's vision extended across the horizon. The story of Genghis Khan's rise continued, a gentle yet powerful rhythm of strategy, loyalty, and subtle influence that would echo across history. The consolidation of the empire marked not an end, but a pivotal moment in the unfolding of destiny, a quiet promise of challenges, triumphs, and the shaping of a legend whose impact would forever change the world. The dawn stretched like a pale ribbon across the endless steppe, casting gentle light upon the rolling grasses and the quiet movements of Temujin's growing army. The air carried the faint scent of earth and dew, mingling with the distant echo of hooves that seemed to beat in rhythm with the heartbeat of history itself. Now, the Khan's vision extended far beyond familiar territories. His influence radiated outward like ripples across a vast, tranquil lake, touching tribes, villages, and distant lands alike. Temujin moved among his generals and allies with a calm authority, each word measured, each gesture deliberate. He no longer acted merely as a tribal leader, but as a force quietly shaping destiny. Scouts brought news of rival Khans, distant settlements, and untamed lands waiting for the steady guidance of his hand. Each report was met not with haste, but with reflection, calculation, and the serene confidence that comes from years of careful preparation. Every step taken was part of a larger plan, a deliberate unfolding of power that moved as softly and inevitably as the wind across the plains. The first of the great campaigns began with precision. Armies marched with measured steps, coordinated movements that blended strategy, speed, and foresight. Temujin's understanding of terrain, timing, and the psychology of both allies and enemies allowed him to orchestrate maneuvers that seemed almost effortless in their elegance. Battles were not chaotic eruptions of violence, but carefully choreographed expressions of intent, where each arrow, each cavalry charge, and each position held carried the weight of strategy and the subtle shaping of fear and respect. Borte remained near, a steady presence among the camps and councils. Her quiet guidance and unwavering support were like a soft light in the midst of the growing turbulence, grounding Temujin and reminding him of the humanity woven into every decision. She spoke with calm assurance to those uncertain of their roles, whispered encouragement to weary leaders, and carried the quiet patience that balanced the intensity of expansion. In her presence, the Khan's purpose found clarity, and the empire he built moved not only through strength, but through wisdom and trust. The steppe itself seemed to respond to the careful orchestration of campaigns. Tribes that once resisted now submitted willingly, drawn not only by the display of military power, but by the quiet authority of a leader who governed with both foresight and fairness. Messages of allegiance, respect, and cautious admiration flowed across the plains like a gentle current, shaping perceptions, influencing decisions, and preparing the foundation for an empire that would endure far beyond the victories of a single season. Yet even as the empire expanded, challenges persisted. Rivals tested boundaries, and distant lands posed uncertainties that demanded constant vigilance. Temujin approached each situation with deliberate calm, observing carefully, acting with purpose, and maintaining the subtle balance of strength, strategy, and empathy. He understood that the true measure of power lay not only in conquest, but in the lasting loyalty and trust of those who followed him willingly. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, casting a soft glow over the plains, Temujin paused to reflect on the journey that had brought him here. The boy who had wandered alone, hunted by rivals, and abandoned by circumstance had become a Khan whose vision stretched across the steppe like the gentle sweep of wind shaping dunes. Each campaign, each alliance, and each deliberate action was a step toward a destiny that would echo across continents, shaping not only the land, but the hearts and minds of those who would carry his legacy forward. Borte joined him atop a ridge, her eyes tracing the golden horizon. "You are not merely conquering lands," she whispered. "You are shaping the world itself, quietly, deliberately, and with the wisdom of patience." Temujin felt the warmth of her words settle deep within him. The empire was more than territory. It was a living network of loyalty, strategy, and foresight, carefully cultivated and steadily growing under his watchful eye. Night fell softly, and the fires of the camps flickered like scattered stars across the vast plains. Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, feeling the pulse of the steppe beneath his feet and the quiet unfolding of a destiny that stretched across time and space. The greatest campaigns had begun, The foundations of enduring power had been laid, and the subtle shaping of the Mongolian horizon continued, guided by a Khan whose vision combined tactical brilliance, patience, and humanity. And so, under the watchful stars and the gentle sweep of night, Temujin's rise continued, a quiet yet unstoppable rhythm that would echo across history. The story of Genghis Khan's empire, forged through strategy, loyalty, and foresight, had entered its most defining phase, a deliberate journey toward power, unity, and the shaping of a world that would never be the same again. The horizon was painted with soft hues of amber and rose as the sun rose over the endless plains, a quiet reminder of the passage of time and the unfolding of destiny. Temujin moved among his commanders, each step deliberate, each word measured, guiding not just armies but hearts and minds. The expansion of his empire was no longer a tentative experiment. It had become a symphony of strategy, loyalty, and foresight, orchestrated with a calm yet relentless hand. The major campaigns had begun to take shape, sweeping across distant lands with a rhythm that blended precision and inevitability. Rivers and mountains, forests and plains, each became a stage for subtle mastery. Temujin understood that true conquest was not measured solely by victories, but by the enduring loyalty of those who once stood in opposition. His approach was both fierce and humane. To demonstrate power, yet offer a vision of stability and shared purpose, a world in which allegiance was earned through respect rather than fear alone. Diplomacy played as critical a role as strategy. Envoys traveled long distances, carrying messages of peace and alliance to far-off khans and rulers. Temujin's words were calm yet persuasive, a careful weaving of respect, warning, and promise. Tribes who had once resisted his rise now reconsidered, swayed by both the inevitability of his victories and the quiet wisdom of his governance. In these exchanges, the young Khan revealed an extraordinary understanding of power. That influence was cultivated as much through empathy and foresight as through skill on the battlefield. The first major conquest of this phase was executed with the precision of a master strategist. Forces moved with coordinated grace, encircling their targets, cutting off avenues of resistance while minimizing unnecessary suffering. Arrows soared silently through the morning sky, and cavalry charges swept with a deliberate elegance, leaving allies and enemies alike in awe of the methodical brilliance behind each maneuver. Temujin's presence was felt without shouting. His authority emanated through careful planning, observation, and the quiet confidence of someone who had endured loss and learned the art of patience. Borte watched from the ridge above, her eyes tracing the unfolding movements below. She offered gentle guidance to officers uncertain of their orders and reassured the young warriors who trembled at the enormity of the campaign. Her presence reminded Temujin that every conquest, every negotiation, and every victory carried a human weight. Strength without care, he had learned, could never endure. The empire must be as much a network of trust as a collection of territories. As days turned into weeks, the campaigns rippled outward, reshaping alliances and altering the balance of power across the steppe. Tribes that once resisted now sent envoys to join the growing coalition. Leaders from distant lands observed his methods with a mixture of awe and caution, recognizing that the Khan's influence extended far beyond the battlefield. Temujin's understanding of logistics, terrain, and human nature allowed him to maneuver vast armies with quiet efficiency, creating a network of power that was both unstoppable and surprisingly humane. Night fell gently, and fires flickered softly across the encampments, their light mirrored in the reflective eyes of Temujin as he walked among his generals. Each victory, each diplomatic engagement, and each subtle alignment of tribes strengthened not only his position, but the deeper network of loyalty and trust that would define the empire's endurance. He reflected on the journey from the lonely boy wandering the steppe to Khan commanding armies, alliances, and the very currents of history. Borte joined him, her presence like a gentle anchor amid the currents of power and conquest. "You have moved beyond the steppe itself," she whispered. "You are shaping the hearts of those who follow you, and the world will remember the harmony you forge as much as the victories you win." Temujin felt the quiet weight of her words settle deep within him. The empire had grown vast, its influence reaching farther than he could see, and yet each step had been deliberate, each decision guided by wisdom and foresight, rather than mere ambition. Under the calm, starlit sky, the Khan allowed himself a rare breath of reflection. The major conquests had revealed both the power of strategy and the resilience of loyalty. The distant tribes and territories he engaged were no longer unknown. They were part of a living, breathing empire shaped by patience, precision, and trust. The story of Genghis Khan's rise reached a turning point. The foundations of ultimate power had been laid, and the quiet, deliberate shaping of the Mongolian horizon continued, guided by a Khan whose vision stretched beyond the present, reaching toward a destiny that would forever alter the world. The steppe stretched endlessly beneath a soft dawn, its vastness mirrored by the growing reach of Temujin's empire. Every hill, river, and plain bore silent witness to the deliberate rhythm of conquest, the careful orchestration of alliances, and the steady march of a leader whose vision extended far beyond the horizon. Each campaign, each decision, carried the weight of history, yet moved with the quiet inevitability of the wind shaping the endless grasses. The final campaigns were not merely battles of swords and arrows, but intricate tests of strategy, loyalty, and human resolve. Temujin's forces moved with fluid precision, anticipating the movements of rivals, encircling armies before they could gather strength, and guiding tribes into alignment with a calm authority that few could resist. The Mongolian plains became a stage upon which every maneuver, every subtle shift, resonated with both purpose and poetry. Victory, though fierce, unfolded quietly, like a tide rising steadily across the land. Diplomacy remained as crucial as the battlefield. Envoys traveled to distant rulers, carrying messages carefully woven with respect, warning, and the promise of unity. Temujin understood that the empire's endurance depended not only on the lands taken, but on the loyalty, trust, and consent of those who now inhabited them. His presence in these negotiations was subtle yet commanding. Every word, every gesture carried the authority of a Khan who had survived storms, betrayal, and hardship, tempered by wisdom and patience. Borte remained a constant, guiding presence, her calm demeanor grounding the Khan and those around him. She whispered encouragement, offered counsel, and reminded Temujin of the delicate balance between power and humanity. Each victory, each alliance, each consolidation of territory was tempered by her steady influence, ensuring that the empire he built was not merely vast, but enduring, not merely feared, but respected. The culmination of these campaigns brought the final pieces of the empire into alignment. Tribes once scattered and wary now sent envoys willingly, acknowledging the inevitability of a new order, a unified Mongolian nation shaped by loyalty, strategy, and foresight. Temujin's brilliance lay not only in his tactical skill, but in his ability to inspire devotion, orchestrate alliances, and weave disparate people into a coherent and resilient network of power. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, painting the plains in hues of gold and amber, Temujin rode among his people, observing the subtle rhythms of camp life, the quiet murmurs of strategy, and the gentle flicker of fires that lit the night. The empire he envisioned was no longer a dream. It was alive, breathing to the coordination of his forces, the allegiance of his allies, and the careful cultivation of trust across the vast steppe. Borte joined him atop a ridge, the fading light reflecting in her eyes. "This is the moment you have long prepared for," she whispered. "The steppe responds to your vision, your patience, and the care you have taken. The world will remember not just your victories, but the harmony you have forged among those who follow you." Temujin felt the weight and warmth of her words settle deep within him. The empire was complete in its first form, a testament to deliberate action, wisdom, and the quiet strength of a leader who understood both the power and responsibility of destiny. Night fell, soft and infinite, the fires of the camps flickering like constellations scattered across the plains. Temujin allowed himself a rare moment of reflection, feeling the pulse of the land beneath his feet and the quiet rhythm of history flowing through every decision, every alliance, and every campaign. The final victories had solidified his rule. The empire had been carefully consolidated, and the Mongolian steppe, once fractured and wild, now bent toward the vision of a Khan whose influence would ripple through time. And so, under the gentle sweep of stars and the whisper of night wind, Temujin stood as the master of the steppe. The story of Genghis Khan's rise had reached its most defining phase, a deliberate, patient, and unstoppable shaping of destiny that combined tactical brilliance, strategic foresight, and the subtle nurturing of loyalty and trust. The empire was vast, its foundation unshakable, and the legend of Khan who changed the world forever continued to unfold, quietly yet powerfully, beneath the endless sky. The steppe lay beneath a soft twilight, the vast horizon painted with fading hues of gold and lavender, as if the world itself paused to witness the culmination of a long, deliberate journey. Temujin rode slowly, the rhythmic beat of horse hooves blending with the whispering whine to the grasses, each step a quiet echo of decades of struggle, strategy, and careful shaping of destiny. The empire had been fully consolidated, tribes once fragmented, distant lands once resistant, and rivals once defiant now recognized a single authority, tempered by both strength and wisdom. Temujin's genius was not only in the victories he had achieved, but in the networks of trust, loyalty, and mutual respect he had cultivated across the steppe. Every alliance was deliberate, every conquest measured, every act of governance imbued with foresight. The Mongolian horizon, once wild and untamed, now responded to the quiet rhythm of his vision. In the encampments, fires flickered softly, casting golden light across faces that had grown accustomed to his presence, yet still revered it. Generals, warriors, and envoys moved with quiet coordination, their loyalty unwavering, their trust earned through years of patient leadership. Temujin observed them with a calm gaze, feeling the pulse of the empire beneath him. It was not a pulse born solely of fear, but respect, understanding, and the subtle acknowledgement of a leader who had endured every hardship, every betrayal, and every storm the steppe had offered. Borte joined him on a gentle rise overlooking the plains, her presence a quiet balm against the weight of history. "You have done more than conquer lands," she whispered, her voice soft as the night wind. "You have shaped the people, the alliances, and the future itself. Your legacy will endure because it is rooted not only in power, but in wisdom, loyalty, and care." Temujin felt the warmth of her words settle deep within him, a quiet affirmation that the empire he built was not merely temporary, but lasting, resilient, and alive in the hearts of all who followed. The reflection of moonlight on the plains created a silver path that seemed to stretch infinitely, echoing the vastness of what he had achieved. Temujin allowed himself a rare, contemplative moment, thinking back to the boy who had once wandered alone, hunted by rivals, and abandoned by circumstance. Every loss, every hardship, every carefully measured decision had led to this moment. An empire solidified, a vision realized, and a destiny quietly fulfilled beneath the infinite sky. Even as he contemplated the magnitude of his achievements, Temujin understood that legacy was a living thing. It was nurtured not only through conquest, but through the continued guidance, fairness, and trust that maintained the cohesion of a vast and diverse people. He envisioned the future generations who would carry forward the strength, wisdom, and unity he had cultivated, the subtle harmonies of his leadership echoing across time. Night deepened, soft and unbroken, and the steppe seemed to breathe in the quiet of a world reshaped. Temujin's empire was now a single, living organism, its heart beating through loyalty, strategy, and the deliberate cultivation of unity. The storms he had survived, the alliances he had forged, and the battles he had led were now part of a quiet, enduring rhythm, one that would echo through centuries to come. Borte rested her hand lightly on his arm, grounding him in the moment. "The world will remember you," she whispered, "not only for the lands you conquered, but for the harmony you forged, the vision you held, and the lives you touched along the way." Temujin nodded, a quiet smile touching his lips. The empire, vast and formidable, had been shaped with both hands of strength and heart of wisdom, and the story of Genghis Khan would forever ripple across history. And so, under the soft, infinite sky of the Mongolian steppe, Temujin stood, not merely as a conqueror, but as a visionary whose deliberate, patient, and humane leadership had reshaped the world. The empire would complete, the legacy secured, and the quiet echo of his rise would resonate across generations. The story of Genghis Khan, a life forged in hardship, strategy, and the subtle art of influence, reached its reflective closure here, a cinematic testament to the power of patience, vision, and enduring leadership, whispered softly across the timeless plains.